Ethan's boots crunched softly against the dry ground as he walked through the dense jungle. The thick vines and towering trees above him seemed to reach for the sky, their roots digging deep into the earth like they were holding secrets long forgotten. Sweat dripped down his face, but he didn't mind the heat. For all his strength and training, the wildness of the jungle was a force he had yet to conquer. And yet, here he was, determined to find what many thought was nothing more than a legend. He had heard whispers of the Sword of Zareth since he was a boy, a blade so powerful that it could defeat entire armies with a single swing. For 1,000 years it had been hidden away, waiting for the one warrior who could prove themselves worthy. Many had tried, but none had succeeded. Some said the sword was cursed. Others claimed it had a mind of its own. Ethan, however, was not afraid. He had fought on distant battlefields and faced enemies who would have made lesser men tremble. He was ready for whatever awaited him in the heart of this jungle. The mission had been simple enough at first: find the temple where the sword was kept, retrieve it, and return to the Federation. But as he journeyed deeper into the jungle, things became more complicated. The air felt different here, thicker, heavier, as if the very land itself was watching him. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch felt like it was meant to test him. His training told him to be alert, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle itself was alive, watching, waiting. After hours of navigating through the thick underbrush, Ethan finally reached the clearing. In front of him stood the entrance to the temple, a vast stone structure partially buried under vines and moss. The temple's towering walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting warriors and gods from an age-long past. Ethan stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path leading up to the entrance. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the excitement building with each step. The entrance was narrow, the stone door heavy and worn by time. Ethan reached out and placed his hand on the cool surface, hesitating for a moment. Inside, he knew, lay the sword that could change everything. It had been waiting for someone worthy to wield it for 1,000 years. Ethan was determined that he would be the one. He pushed the door open, the grinding sound of stone on stone echoing through the stillness. As he stepped inside, a wave of cool air hit him. The interior was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of light streaming in from cracks in the stone. Dust filled the air, settling over everything in thick layers. The temple felt ancient, but it was not abandoned. No, this place had been waiting for him. The walls inside were lined with more carvings, these showing the sword in various forms, as a weapon, a symbol of power, and sometimes even as a guardian, standing tall against enemies. At the far end of the temple stood an altar, bathed in a shaft of light that seemed to come from nowhere. And there, resting on the altar, was the Sword of Zareth. The sword was magnificent. It was larger than any blade Ethan had ever seen, its hilt shaped like a dragon's claw, its blade shimmering with an eerie, otherworldly glow. The air around it seemed to hum with energy, as if the sword itself was alive, waiting for someone to claim it. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the power emanating from the blade, and he knew instantly that this was no ordinary weapon. He stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt. The moment his fingers brushed against the cold metal, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the sword was testing him, evaluating his worth. Ethan's grip tightened, and with a sudden, almost effortless motion, he lifted the sword from its resting place. For a brief moment, the entire temple seemed to tremble, as though the earth itself was reacting to the sword's movement. But as the sword rose into the air, something strange happened. The glowing blade flickered, and a voice, a deep, resonant voice, filled the chamber. "Not you, human." Ethan froze, the sword still gripped tightly in his hands. The voice wasn't coming from any visible source. It was as if it came from the sword itself, echoing through his very bones. He looked around, his heart racing. What had just happened? The sword seemed to grow heavier in his hands, and a strange pressure built up in the air. He tried to lift it higher, but it resisted him, pushing back with an immense force. His muscles strained and his breath quickened as he struggled to hold on. "Not you, human," the voice repeated, more forcefully this time. "You are not worthy." Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion and frustration. How could this be? He had passed the trials outside, had fought through the jungle and the dangers within it. He had done everything right. Yet the sword was rejecting him. The sword of legend, the sword that could change everything, refused to accept him. The sword's resistance was overwhelming. Ethan staggered back, his hands shaking as he tried to steady himself. His mind raced. What was this? Why wasn't he worthy? What was he missing? The weight of the sword felt unbearable now. He dropped it to the altar, his hands aching from the strain. The moment it touched the stone, the pressure in the room lifted, and the voice faded into silence. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the sword that had rejected him. For a long moment there was nothing but the quiet hum of the temple. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. She was tall, her skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her armor was adorned with intricate designs and her eyes glowed with a fierce intensity. She walked toward him, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "You failed," she said, her voice calm yet powerful. "You are not worthy." Ethan's heart sank as he looked at her. She was no ordinary being. There was something ancient about her, something that made her seem both timeless and terrifying. She was the guardian of the sword, the one who had protected it for 1,000 years. I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I passed the trials. I'm strong. I'm ready." The guardian's eyes narrowed and she studied him with an intensity that made him feel small. "You misunderstand. The sword does not seek strength alone. It seeks something far more difficult to find in a human. It seeks a spirit worthy of its power." Ethan swallowed hard. He had no idea what she meant. "What do you mean? I fought for this. I've earned it." The guardian shook her head slowly. "The sword will never choose a warrior who only seeks power for themselves. You may be strong, human, but your heart is still tainted by pride. The sword demands more than mere skill or ambition. It demands a spirit untainted by selfishness. The true test has just begun." With that, she turned and began to walk away, her presence still filling the temple with a heavy weight. Ethan stood there, stunned and humiliated. He had failed. The sword had rejected him, and now he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. But even as doubt began to creep in, Ethan felt something stir within him. He wasn't done yet. He hadn't come this far to give up. He would prove that he was worthy of the sword. He had to. For the fate of humanity, for everything he had worked for, he would find a way to earn the sword's respect. And so, with a determined breath, Ethan turned to face the sword once more, ready to begin his true trial. The path ahead would not be easy, but he would not walk away from this challenge. The sword had waited for 1,000 years, and he would prove that he was the one it had been waiting for. The chamber was quiet now, save for the sound of Ethan's heavy breaths. The sword, still lying untouched on the altar, seemed to pulse, with a strange energy, as if taunting him. He had failed. The weight of that failure pressed down on him like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. He could feel the eyes of the guardian on him, watching, waiting for him to make the next move. Ethan stood there for what seemed like an eternity, his mind racing. How had it all gone so wrong? He had passed the trials outside the temple. He had overcome dangers he couldn't even remember, each step bringing him closer to this moment. But now, the sword, his prize, his goal, rejected him. The words echoed in his mind. "Not you, human." "What did I do wrong?" he muttered to himself, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "I'm strong. I fought for this." The guardian's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's not about strength alone." Ethan turned to face her, but she was already walking towards the sword. Her pace was slow, measured, as if she had all the time in the universe. She stopped at the altar, her hand hovering just above the sword, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she spoke again, her voice calm and unyielding. The sword does not choose just any warrior. It seeks a spirit worthy of its power. And you, Ethan, are not ready. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. He wanted to shout at her, to demand answers. But something in her eyes, the depth of experience, the weight of wisdom, held him back. He had no words for the feelings coursing through him: anger, confusion, a deep gnawing sense of inadequacy. "What do I need to do then?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The guardian studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing, as if she could see through him. Then finally she spoke. "You must face the true trial, not of strength but of heart. You must confront your own doubts, your fears, and your weaknesses. Only then will you prove yourself worthy of the sword." Ethan blinked, unsure if he understood. "You mean fight something?" "No." She shook her head. "This is not a fight against others. It is a fight within yourself. The sword." Ethan's heart pounded as he walked away from the edge of the cliff, his mind still reeling from the haunting vision of his older self. He had faced his past, accepted the mistakes he had made, but deep down, a lingering doubt remained. Was he truly worthy? Was he the warrior the sword needed? Could he ever be the kind of person who could hold such a powerful weapon? As he walked back toward the altar where the sword of Zareth lay waiting, a part of him felt lighter. The weight of his past no longer seemed as heavy, but there was still a part of him that doubted. Could he really change? Could he become the kind of man the sword required? The thoughts churned in his mind, and the more he thought about it, the more unsure he became. He reached the altar and the sword still lay there, glowing softly in the dim light of the temple. The energy in the air seemed to hum with anticipation, almost as if the sword knew he was coming. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering just above the hilt. His grip tightened, and with a deep breath he wrapped his fingers around the handle once more. As soon as his fingers touched the sword, the room seemed to shift again. The light around him flared brightly, blinding him for a moment. When the light faded, he was standing in a vast, open field. The sky above was a deep shade of red, and the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. In the distance, he could see an army of warriors, all standing tall and proud, waiting for him to face them. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the army. His heart raced as he realized what this trial was. It wasn't about facing his past anymore. It was about facing the world. It was about proving that he had the strength to fight for what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. It was about showing the sword that he had what it took to wield its power. As he took a step forward, the voice of the sword echoed in his mind. "This is your final test, Ethan. But you are not ready. You cannot defeat them." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? I've faced worse. I've fought battles, won wars. I can handle this." "No," the voice said, cold and unwavering. "You cannot win with strength alone. You still lack what matters most. Your heart is not ready for the sword. You are driven by pride, by a need to prove yourself, not by the desire to protect others." The word stung, and Ethan took a step back, his grip on the sword tightening. "I've been fighting for others, for the people who need someone to protect them. I've given everything for that." The sword was silent for a moment, as if considering his words. Then it spoke again. "Your heart is not pure. You seek glory, Ethan. You seek recognition. The sword does not belong to someone who fights for their own fame. It belongs to someone who fights for others without thinking of themselves." Ethan's knees nearly buckled at the weight of the sword's words. Was it true? Had he been so caught up in the idea of proving himself, of becoming the hero he'd always dreamed of, that he had lost sight of the real reason he fought? The thought hit him like a thunderclap. Maybe he hadn't been fighting for the right reasons at all. Maybe he had been blinded by his own pride, seeking glory and recognition instead of fighting to protect others for the sake of protecting them. He looked at the army in the distance, their dark figures standing tall and menacing. The battle ahead seemed impossible. He wasn't ready. He didn't have the pure heart the sword demanded. But then, something changed within him. A realization washed over him. A quiet understanding. He had always fought, because he wanted to make a difference. He had always believed in the cause he fought for, even if it meant putting himself at risk. He had risked his life on countless occasions, not for the fame or the glory, but for the people who needed him. That's why he had joined the military in the first place. To protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to be a force for good in a universe that was often cruel and unforgiving. His grip on the sword loosened slightly, and the sword seemed to hum with a new energy, as if acknowledging his shift in understanding. He looked at the army once more, but this time, instead of fear, he felt a sense of determination. He could do this. Not for glory, not for fame, but because he had the heart to fight for others. The army began to advance toward him, their weapons drawn. Ethan didn't move. He stood tall, holding the sword before him. The sword was still heavy in his hands, but now it felt like a part of him, like an extension of his own spirit. The energy of the blade seemed to sync with his heartbeat, and, for the first time, he truly understood what the sword required. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a test of the soul, and for the first time Ethan felt truly ready to face it. As the army closed in, he lifted the sword high above his head, a silent promise to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The sword flashed with blinding light, and the world around him seemed to fade away. The voice of the sword. When the light finally faded, Ethan found himself back in the temple. The sword was still in his hands, but something had changed. The air felt different, lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The sword's voice echoed in his mind once more, but this time it was softer, almost approving. "You have passed the test, Ethan," the sword said. "You have proven that your heart is not driven by pride, but by the desire to protect. You are worthy of the sword." Ethan felt a rush of emotions flood through him. Relief, joy, but most of all a deep sense of gratitude. He had done it. He had proven himself. He had faced his doubts, his fears, and his past, and he had emerged stronger because of it. But even as the sword spoke, Ethan knew that his journey was far from over. The sword had accepted him, but there was still so much left to do. The battles ahead would not be easy. He would face enemies far more dangerous than any army. But now, with the sword in his hand and his heart in the right place, he knew he could face whatever lay ahead. The guardian stood behind him, watching silently. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a glint of approval in her eyes. "Your journey is not finished, Ethan," she said. "The sword has chosen you, but there is still much to be done. The power you wield comes with great responsibility. You must prove yourself worthy in ways beyond what you have already faced." Ethan nodded. He understood. The sword was not just a weapon to be wielded. It was a burden, a responsibility, and a symbol of the strength and honor required to protect others. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "I will fight for those who need me. I will protect them." The guardian's eyes softened slightly, and she nodded in return. "Then go. Your destiny awaits." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the sword in his hand. He was no longer the same man who had entered this temple. He had grown, he had learned, and now he was ready for whatever lay ahead. With the sword of Zareth in his hands, he was no longer just a warrior. He was a protector, and his true test had only just begun. The sword of Zareth felt heavier than ever in Ethan's hands as he stood at the temple's entrance. The cool stone of the walls pressed against his back, the weight of the blade now feeling like an extension of his very being. His breath was steady, and his thoughts were clear. He had passed the trials. He had faced his fears, his pride, his past. But now, with the sword accepted and his heart purified, a new challenge loomed before him. "You are ready now," the guardian's voice echoed from behind him, soft and wise. "But the true trial is not one of strength, nor of your heart alone. It is one of your choices, the choices that will define not only your fate, but the fate of others." Ethan turned to face her. The guardian's presence was calm and powerful. as though she had lived for centuries, guarding the sword from those who would misuse its power. The temple's dim light cast shadows across her face, making her seem almost ethereal. "I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice quiet but filled with curiosity. "What do you mean by choices? I've fought. I've faced my past. Isn't that enough?" The Guardian's eyes softened, but there was a quiet sadness in them. "You've proven yourself worthy to wield the sword, yes. But it is not enough to simply hold it. You must now decide what kind of warrior you will be. Will you use the sword for glory, for power, or will you wield it to protect the innocent, to right the wrongs of the galaxy? The sword is not just a weapon, it is a choice." Ethan looked down at the sword, his fingers brushing lightly over the hilt. It was not just a sword. It was a symbol of responsibility, of the weight of what it meant to carry such power. He had always fought to protect others, to make a difference. But now, with the sword in his hands, he realized that he was about to face an even greater responsibility. "What do I have to do?" he asked, determination returning to his voice. "Where do I go from here?" The Guardian stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You must choose, Ethan. The world you live in is filled with conflict, war, and strife. You will face enemies who seek to conquer, to control. They will test you, tempt you with power, with promises of victory. But you must choose to rise above them, to protect, to fight for what is right, not for personal gain." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding now what the Guardian meant. The sword had chosen him because he was ready to fight for something greater than himself. It was not about proving his strength or seeking recognition. It was about making the right choices even when it was hard. The true test would be how he used the sword, how he chose to wield it in a galaxy full of darkness. The sword will guide you. Ethan felt the weight of the sword of Zareth once again, but this time it wasn't heavy with doubt or uncertainty. It was heavy with purpose. He had made his choice, to protect, to defend the innocent, and to rise above the temptation of power, for its own sake. But the path ahead was still clouded with challenges. There were forces out there that sought the sword for their own selfish desires, and Ethan knew that his true test was only just beginning. The night air was still, the jungle, around him eerily quiet as he stood with Kira, the mysterious woman who had appeared from the shadows. She had warned him that there were enemies far more dangerous than any he had faced before, enemies who would stop at nothing to seize the sword. But what did she mean by that? Who were these enemies, and how could they be stopped? Kira watched him closely, her eyes sharp as if she were reading his thoughts. She had been silent for a few moments, letting Ethan process what she had said. Finally, she spoke. "The enemies I spoke of are not just mercenaries or armies," she began, her voice steady yet laced with concern. "They are powerful beings, rulers, warlords, and even beings from other realms who want the power of the sword. The sword of Zareth is more than just a weapon. It is a key to unimaginable power, and that power can corrupt even the most well-intentioned souls." Ethan tightened his grip on the sword's hilt. He understood the danger now. It wasn't just about defeating armies. It was about the potential for this blade to fall into the wrong hands and bring destruction to entire worlds. His heart surged with a new sense of urgency. "I'll protect it," he said firmly, looking directly at Kira. "I won't let it fall into the wrong hands." Kira nodded, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "I know you will, but you need to be prepared. There are those out there who have already learned of the sword's return, and they won't be easy to defeat." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't naive enough to think that he could keep the sword safe forever on his own. The galaxy was vast, and there were always those willing to fight for power. But for the first time, he felt ready, not just to fight, but to stand for something greater than himself. "Where do we go now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. "How do we find these enemies before they find us?" Kira's eyes darkened as she looked toward the distant horizon. "There is a place, a hidden fortress, where these dark beings gather. It is called the Citadel of the Fallen. It is said to be hidden in the depths of the nebula of Vecron, a region of space where few have ventured and even fewer return from." "The Nebula of Vecron," Ethan repeated, his mind racing. He had heard of the nebula, a vast and dangerous region of space, filled with cosmic storms and black holes. No one went there, not unless they had a death wish. Kira turned toward him, her expression grave. The Citadel is where they will make their move. We must get there before they do, or the sword will be lost forever. Ethan didn't hesitate. He had made up his mind. The sword was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of hope for the galaxy. He would not let it fall into the hands of those who would use it for evil. "I'll follow you," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "Let's get to the nebula. Let's stop them." Kira gave him a sharp nod. "Good, but we must be quick. The longer we wait, the stronger they become." With a plan set in motion, Ethan and Kira left the jungle behind and made their way to a small outpost on the planet's surface. The outpost was hidden, an old forgotten station that had once been used for research but had long since fallen into disrepair. Now it served as a place of refuge for those who sought to remain out of the spotlight. Inside, they found a ship, a sleek, agile vessel designed for long-distance travel through dangerous space. It wasn't the most advanced ship, but it would. Kira had prepared everything in advance. The ship's engines roared to life as they boarded, and they set off toward the nebula of Vecron. The journey to the nebula was not an easy one. The ship shook and groaned as they entered the turbulent space, the cosmic storms surrounding them like an endless sea of chaos. The lights flickered on and off, and the navigation system struggled to maintain a steady course through the swirling mass of energy and matter. Ethan stood at the control panel beside Kira, watching the stars streak by, his mind filled with questions. He had come so far, but he knew this was just the beginning. The enemies he would face would be unlike anything he had encountered before, dark, powerful beings who would stop at nothing to claim the sword. He looked at Kira, who was focused on the controls, her expression unreadable. She had been calm and collected ever since they had set out, but Ethan could see the underlying tension in her movements. She knew the stakes. She knew what they were up against. "How do you know about the Citadel?" Ethan asked, his voice cutting through the hum of the engines. Kira glanced at him, her eyes briefly meeting his. "I've been there," she said quietly. "I've seen what they're capable of." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You've been to the Citadel?" Kira nodded slowly. "I was once part of a group that sought to stop them. We failed. Many died. But I survived, and I've been hunting them ever since. The Citadel is where they gather their strength, where they make their plans. It is the heart of their power." Ethan could see the pain in her eyes, the memories of the past that haunted her. He wanted to ask more, but he knew this wasn't the time. They had to focus on the task ahead. The Citadel was waiting, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The ship shook again as they entered the heart of the nebula. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, and the stars seemed to disappear, swallowed by the swirling storm. The ship's sensors beeped furiously, warning them of the danger. "Ahead, there," Kira said, pointing ahead. "The Citadel is just beyond the storm. We have to make it through." Ethan looked out the window and saw it, a dark, looming structure floating in the center of the storm, the Citadel of the Fallen. It was a fortress like no other, made of dark stone and twisted metal with spires reaching toward the sky. The walls were covered in strange markings, glowing faintly with an eerie light. It was a place of power, a place that had seen the rise and fall of countless beings. They were getting closer. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. The true test was about to begin. He would have to face these enemies head-on. He would have to protect the sword, protect the galaxy, and protect himself from the darkness that was closing in. As they neared the Citadel, the ship's sensors went haywire. A loud warning alarm blared, and the ship jolted violently. Ethan gripped the armrest, trying to steady himself as the ship was buffeted by the storm. Kira cursed under her breath and slammed her hand down on the controls. "We're losing power. We won't make it through the storm unless I can stabilize the engines." Ethan looked out the window, his eyes narrowing. They were too close to the Citadel now to turn back. They had to push through, or everything they had worked for would be lost. "I'll help," Ethan said, standing up. He ran to the rear of the ship where the auxiliary systems were located. "What do I need to do?" "Just keep the systems from failing," Kira called over her shoulder. "If the ship goes down, we're done." Ethan quickly got to work, using his knowledge of starship mechanics to reroute power and stabilize the engines. His hands flew over the controls, working in tandem with Kira's efforts at the helm. The ship groaned under the strain, but they were making it through. And then, with a final surge of energy, they broke free from the storm, emerging into the eerie calm around the citadel. The storm still raged in the distance, but they had made it. They were here. The real battle was about to begin. The citadel loomed before them, its dark silhouette cutting through the stormy sky like a jagged tooth. Ethan could feel the presence of something powerful within its walls. It was a place that seemed to exude danger, an ancient structure that had been built not just to withstand time but to endure all threats. Now it stood as a fortress of darkness, its purpose clear, to control the powerful sword of Zareth and all that it represented. Ethan stood at the helm of the ship, his hands gripping the control panel. The ship, though battered by the storm, was holding up. Kira sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the approaching fortress. The weight of their mission hung heavily on both of them. They couldn't afford to fail, not now, not when they were so close. "Get ready," Kira said, her voice tight with tension. "We're almost there. The citadel is heavily guarded. We'll have to land nearby and approach on foot." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. "We're not turning back, right?" "No," Kira replied firmly, her eyes flashing with resolve. "We finish this. No matter what happens." The ship shuddered as they entered the shadow of the citadel. The dark stone spires seemed to reach for the sky, their tips almost lost in the swirling storm clouds above. Ethan could feel the pull of the citadel's dark energy like a magnetic force drawing him in. But now he was no longer afraid. He had faced his doubts. He had faced his past. And now, with the sword of Zareth in his hands, he was ready for whatever lay ahead. The ship began to descend, its landing gear scraping against the rocky surface of the citadel's outer perimeter. The storm around them howled, but the calm center of the fortress was eerily still. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the two warriors quickly moved into action. Ethan took a deep breath as he stood from his seat. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of tea.